In the garden of Avallaunius, a journey of senses, written and read by Michael Bresitulis as a tribute to Arthur Macon's Hill of Dreams. The colors of odors dance in my garden. The beauty of roses is the music of the dawn, death and birth of the clouds. My garden is a lyre of Sappho. I am Avallaunius, creator of my worlds, architect of dreams. My thoughts are birth and death of everything and nothing, of my everything, of my nothing. I am the beginning and the end, Alpha and Omega. Outside of me there is no reality, no truth, no beauty. I am unique and supreme, the source of true bliss. I am the only I. I am Avallaunius. The colors of orders dance in my garden. Avallaunius gazed upon his garden from the humble height of the hills. Wearing her dress of crimson, day gave her place to night, who covered the garden with her veil of ebony. In the safe haven of darkness, the shadows started dancing upon the ancient walls and between the trees, repeating their rite of eternity, hidden from the inexplicably curious, but nearly blind, eye of moment. The arrogant roses nodded their heads toward a company of jasmine, stating thus that they, and only they, had the right to bear the crown of the kingdom of flowers. He looked upon his garden, and he knew that it was all his. Everything was made for his delight. Everything would bow before him. He was king, and reigned in his kingdom, and every being would submit to his will. For he was Avallaunius, the creator of all that beauty, that owed its existence only to him. And following those perfect, glorious thoughts, beauty herself, dressed as night, appeared to him, gestured towards the benighted garden, and said, "These are my gifts to Avallaunius, who is both my servant and master, my slave, my chosen lover. His garden is my throne, and he is my scepter. In his heart I shall reign eternally, and thus death and time shall not touch him. Behold my gifts to Avallaunius, the beautiful, the fair." And thus beauty left and disappeared like a snowflake in the December cold, but before forsaking the garden of Avallaunius, she kissed him goodbye with the tenderness and passion of a dying lover. And he knew that he would see her again. He knew that she would soon come to him again, asking to be worshipped as her divine nature demanded. Soon she would return to the garden they had built together, built by his imagination and her song. Soon she would return, and he would taste absolute happiness. In his palace, Avallaunius welcomed the coming of light. The golden rays of the morning sun danced on the precious marble and cast their reflections like the silver locks of Diana and the golden beauty of Venus. Some of the morning light got trapped within the diamonds and sapphires with which the palace was decorated, and therein it shone brightest, beaming with rage for its imprisonment. Outside, beneath the glowing sun, the forest shone like a wall of emerald that protected the magical garden of Avallaunius, and the magnificent palace that sat like a king on his throne at the garden's core. The morning rays penetrated the water of the small pond and were sent back into the world, traveling thus for all eternity through the pathways of infinity. And the beaming of the sun came down upon the garden like a sulphurous river of amber, bathing everything in its splendor and magnificence. And the skies opened, and from within their depths came raining down trillions of dancing flakes of light, covering the creations of Avallaunius like a luminous veil of Luna Hecate. It was that small ray of light released from the pond that had triggered this divine reaction of the heavens. For the marvels of the garden of Avallaunius shall be envied even by the gods. This is the will of beauty. Light exists only to reveal the wonders of the garden, for only Avallaunius deserves beauty's true love. Only he can be the master of her desire. Only he may demand her devotion. Avallaunius lay in a flower bed of crimson roses. Dewdrops had formed on the small red wounds on his pale flesh, the delicate kisses of the thorns. It was morning. He awoke, his lids opened. He threw his gaze into the eyes-devouring clouds and exclaimed, "Hail, Mundus, thou art my garden!" The sky responded. It sent a single drop of rain to relieve Avallaunius of the burning fever that tortures those who have created too much beauty. He received the cooling blessing and turned his back on the glory of the morning sun. And as he walked toward the palace, a faun standing on a distant hill greeted him with an invisible smile. The sun burned almost unbearably, but there was something divine about that heat. It was as if the raining sunflakes bore with them a most luminous blessing, the beauty of a maddening fever, the wonders encountered in a summer delirium. The glowing air was dancing, altering his vision, and there in the distance the palace seemed to swim in the most crystalline of waters. The road to the palace was long. The sweat burned in his wounds. But after a while it became just another sensation. In the end, he could call it wonderful. When Avallaunius reached his palace, the golden gate opened with a most glorious sound and revealed the majestic court. The dancing orders welcomed him. The nodding roses whispered their colors in the air, invading thus the nostrils of Avallaunius, with which he saw the flowers' most melodic songs. Synesthesia, he thought, and whispered to himself. Synesthesia. Avallaunius kneeled before the coming of night. The petals of ebony brought the gifts of wonder, and he welcomed inspiration with delight. "O night," he whispered into the wind, "what beauty thou bearest!" He gazed upon the stars and let his fine features be caressed by the wind. He closed his eyes and listened to the silent vibrations of the tongue of Aeolus. Somewhere near his hill of observation, from where he defined the movement of the cosmos, an ethereal silhouette roamed playfully, moving back and forth betwixt two figures that embraced her, kissed her tenderly, and then released her again. It was Psyche, caught between the charms of Eros and Pan, who delighted in the sweetness of her flesh and the fairness of her movement. Avallaunius beheld with dreamy eyes the playing gods and pondered. And his ponderings were filled with the joys of love and accompanied by the tunes of Bacchus. He surrendered to dream, and for a moment he held Psyche in his arms and kissed her breasts and drank delight from her nipples. And there were dancing fauns circling them in joy, and there were satyrs playing for them melodies most sublime with their flutes. And Apollo descended from Mount Olympus and kneeled in adoration before his enemy Bacchus, and blessed the wind with a song from his lyre. And Avallaunius, imprisoned betwixt the legs of Psyche, invaded her most holy holiness, and pleasure and happiness was his. Avallaunius awoke and kneeled before the morning glory. Avallaunius sat on a marble throne that was placed near the balcony, so that it would allow the sitter's face to be caressed by soft winds and his gaze to travel toward the horizon. In his hand he held a fine glass made of iridescent amber that contained some of his best wine, taken from that barrel in his cellar that was marked with the emblem of the faun. He shared his gaze between the clouds that crowned the mountain tops and the dancing sprites within the glass. What a joyful journey of the eyes, Avallaunius said to himself, and smiled in peaceful delight. He let the wind caress him and pondered in silence, and after the breeze had completed its wandering on his skin, "O wind," he whispered, "thou art but wonder in disguise." And it was indeed so. He brought the glass to his lips. The odors that arose from it, like ethereal nymphs, intruded inside him from his nostrils and found their way to his lungs and his very essence. They wrapped themselves around the strings of his senses like soft silk ribbons, where they nested for the rest of the afternoon. "O wind," Avallaunius whispered, and fell into silence. Avallaunius bathed in the smoothness of odors. He lay in a field of flowers that seemed to stretch to infinity, where colors, odors, and sounds were bound into one and left their echo as a single sensation. He delighted in this lightness, and allowed his lids to fall heavily over his eyes and shroud them. The wind carried him away, lifting him above the ground. He rose like dust and fell like snow. He floated through the branches and then above the trees, reaching to the sun like a mesmerized Icarus. The song of the skylarks accompanied his journey to Hypnos, and he followed the music of crystalline strings into the mouth of the great abyss. His feet touched the ground. He was dressed in light and soft garments of the Greco-Roman times that danced on his body like thin air. He stood amidst a barren landscape before two pillars that framed the setting sun that dressed everything in the dying glory of its crimson light. Myriads of invisible voices, bound into one, were chanting, and they spake but one name, Azrael. He knew at last he stood before the west gate. He stared into the mouth of death. "Azrael! Azrael!" he screamed into the heavenly voices, and opened wide the voice of God. And the heavens split open, and devoured the dying sun and the hunger and the glory of the abyss. Avallaunius awoke in a field of nocturnal blossoms that softly turned their heads toward the west gate, bowing before its ardor. Night fell upon the beauty of Avallaunius and shrouded him in his garden and perfection. He threw his eyes upon his kingdom and creation, and once again beauty was there to praise him and please him with every joy of mind and flesh. And the garden blossomed with gleefulness and beamed with glory. Everything was born of his will, and everything was as it should be. He knew this, and he shall always know, and there he shall reign eternally in his garden beyond the clouds, where flowers never wither, where nothing ever dies. I am Avallaunius. The colors of odors dance in my garden. The end.